Hello everyone, and welcome to this every 2-week webinar series on markets, the economy, and a bit on financial consciousness, because I've been getting increasing number of questions of what the heck that means for people who have visited the website. So I'll take a little time to talk about that. Again, as I usually do, I'm going to jump around a bit. I'm going to incorporate some of the questions people have sent in advance with what I'm going to talk about today. And it will be, again, as I pick things up from the information, because there's quite a lot that's happened. And as always, please look at the Q&A or the chat box below, and feel free to type in your questions at any time, and I will get to every single one of them that get in before the end. So I will answer your questions. It really helps me do a great job of making the content as relevant as possible to everyone that's listening, not only today, but also the great numbers of you that take the recordings and talk to me later. And thank you again for sending questions in advance, because again, it helps me kind of put this together. So on the economic update now, I'll start with the biggest question that I've gotten from the most people, which is what the heck is going on with the markets right now? We had a pretty quiet period from the bottom that we experienced in March up until just recently, when the market started to become a lot more volatile. And for those of you that have been listening to these, I've been saying for a while, this is coming, it will happen, be prepared, and now it's happening. There's a number of reasons for it, but I'll talk about a few kind of key points. And again, questions, type them up, and I'll get to those as well. The biggest one is nothing goes straight up. Trees don't grow to the sky. There's always going to need a breather. It's sort of letting the air out of the tire that's become a bit overinflated. As I had spoken of previously, much of this, the market's run up in the last 5-6 months has been in the technology sector. And a lot of companies became highly valued. Why is this? I think we can all see at this point that technology companies were less affected, and in many cases greatly benefited from the COVID and the resulting shutdown or shelter in place around COVID. So when you're sheltering in place, you still need to do things, you still want to do things. How can you use technology to have things delivered to your home, to communicate with other people, to work from home? Your kids can learn at home. Many uses of technology. And the companies that were less impacted, their workforce could easily work remotely, and the needs for their services was the same or much greater than in the past. So out the gate, the technology companies, especially the large technology companies, took the lead. Now what happened is, if you think of the S&P 500, that's 500 companies. However, it's market cap weighted, which means the largest companies take a greater proportion of the S&P 500 than the smallest of the 500. So it was really 5 companies that was driving the market up. The other 495 companies were not really appreciating much. We're not really growing, or we're well below their COVID. If you look at the companies individually, well below where they were pre-COVID. It was the technology companies kind of pulling that up, and the weighting became larger and larger and larger as the companies became bigger and bigger and bigger. Sort of like that catch-22. So we had a situation. There's a point when, again, the valuations get really high, and there's a breather. Prices drop significantly, especially since they've run up so much, and could continue to, until which time is that the prices of the stock is justified. Generally, that's from earnings reports, right, or other information that comes to. Excuse me. Sorry about that. So that being said, it was a big driver was large technology companies. You may have heard this acronym before, FANG. We call them oftentimes. Some other acronyms are similar. And it's basically Facebook, Apple, Google, and for a period of time, Netflix in there as well, Amazon. So that being said, figured this out. Sorry, this is the office phone that nobody uses except for all the people calling me to ask me how I'm going to vote. Apparently, it's election season. That being said, that was the big driver, and that really ran up. And then the companies now, the smaller companies, the S&P 500, are beginning to catch up, which I'll talk a bit about later. So drop off again, high valuations, rapid move upward, and just seeing if these numbers make sense is that correction there. But because of the weighting of these large technology companies that have gone up so high, it brings the whole market down because it also brought it up. A number 2 factor in here is a big one, and that is the inability for Congress to agree on the stimulus plan. I've spoken about this before. Regardless of where your political leanings are, this is really important because there are many, many people in this country that are suffering greatly, many businesses and many people whose jobs are lost and are not coming back anytime soon, especially in travel and leisure, service sector and whatnot. There needs to be some stimulus. It's an election year. Each side is kind of dug in with their principles, and it's increasingly likely that nothing will happen until after the election. There is some pressure. Okay, on the Republican side, they want to be cautious about how much stimulus there is until they can see the results, kind of doing it bit by bit just to see, is this going to work? Is this going to work? And on the Democrat side, the idea of just put it all out there and do everything that we can do right now. That's the narratives that each side is saying. Now, as we all know, there's a lot of politics in there as well. It's an election year. The better the economy does, the more likely the incumbent is reelected. The worse the economy does, traditionally, the more likely that we have a new president. So there's a lot of thought to that as well. There's pressure on both sides to get things done. Donald Trump has made it very clear to the Republicans in the Senate that he wants a deal, he'd love a deal, and I think he said something along the lines of, the money is going in America or staying in America anyway, get it done. On the Democratic side, there's pressure on Nancy Pelosi from Democrats whose seats are at risk because their incumbents are pressuring them to get a deal done because of the devastation happening within their communities. And there are many communities in this country, and I'm going to pick on one example, college towns. All the businesses that thrive around the students and the teachers and everybody being there, being at college, being at school, are suffering. Many local restaurants that are either partially open or not open at all, bars and the likes, are suffering. These people are talking to their leaders and they're saying, get something done. So there is pressure on both sides, but it doesn't look like something will happen, barring some surprise last minute, and that's putting pressure on the economy. Part of that is because while there are parts of the economy that are doing well, very well now, there are also parts that have barely recovered and have not recovered at all. So it's necessary for the stimulus to help the people that are unemployed, where there are no jobs in their specific sectors. It's also helpful to the towns and the communities and the businesses. There is billions of dollars left in the PPP loans, and this has gone on, the shelter in place has gone on much longer than was originally anticipated when the original PPP was passed in the CARES Act. There's plenty of money left in the program. However, businesses are not allowed to go in for a second round without approval and an agreement from Congress. So this is the greatest challenge to our economy right now, is the inability for the two sides to come together and at least do some stimulus, get something done, get the few things done, see how that goes, and go on to the next round after election would be the best thing for many people in this country as well as the economy as a whole. Again, it's politics and it's an election year, so we may see some effects from a while. At this point now, originally it looked like the fourth quarter was going to be about a 6% GDP number, 6%, which is a really, really attractive number. We're starting to ease that back closer to 3% because of the lack of stimulus and agreement. And if it happens after election, it won't really impact the fourth quarter. However, it actually increases 2021. So I'll talk a little bit about 2021 in a moment because it's a very different story. So those reasons are largely why the markets are pulling back. The third reason is much smaller, but it is still out there. It's not really so much the markets, it's more on the individuals level, which is a concern that many people have, is what happens around the election. That's probably the number 2 question that people had in different forms. And as I mentioned previously, it's highly likely that the results either will not be known on November 2nd or November 3rd, or they'll be contested by the losing party. Both parties are preparing for that. They're both setting up pretty powerful legal teams. There's a lot of talk around it. On the Republican side, it's concerns around votes being mass mailed out and not being validated for accuracy. On the Democratic side, the concerns that the post office is not funded enough to count the votes properly, and some votes won't be counted, and the results will be inaccurate. And so those narratives are there, which means almost certainly there's going to be time to double check the accuracy of the voting before we have a president officially announced. That may not happen, but it's increasingly likely. That will create some concern around the markets, but it's largely being priced in somewhat in advance, and it will be resolved. It may not be till December, could even go into January, but there's a process in place for all of these outcomes and all of these scenarios. And there's even a process in place of the other concern that people brought in, which was along, what if the president, what if Donald Trump doesn't step down? there's a process for that as well. So from a structural standpoint, we'll be fine, but it may be a bumpy ride to get there in a highly, highly partisan environment that we're in now. Economically, it's not going to have a big impact. I will speak at the last webinar before the election in depth about where we're at and what's likely to happen. But that's bring that now because that is some of what's affecting the markets. Overall, though, the economy continues to grow. Some sectors much better than others. But the most heartening thing that we're seeing right now is instead of being primarily technology driving everything up and everybody else struggling, we're starting to see the rotation into other sectors. As things continue to open up, we're starting to see rotators, starting to see other companies start to get their legs and run up. So wave 2 of this recovery, which is always fun for me, identifying these companies and putting them in your portfolios, is the companies and industries within industries that are using technology to restructure how they do things for the environment that we're in now, which will strengthen them coming out of the COVID era. So there's a lot of companies that are doing that. Some were investing in and utilizing technology before COVID. Others are picking it up really quickly. What will happen for these companies is they will take tremendous market share from their competitors, much like the technology companies, and I should say like Amazon, Apple, that took tremendous market share from a lot of brick and mortar businesses. The next wave is going to be that, and this is in every single sector. There are opportunities here with the companies that are restructuring and using technology, again, faster than their peers. This is important even beyond the times of COVID because we are rapidly changing the way that we do things. The COVID era has actually, because we model out technological innovation in a lot of what we do as economists, we basically jumped 6 years into the future in the last 6 months in our adoption and use of technology. Let that sink in for a moment. You're actually sitting in 2026 and you didn't even need a time machine. We are there. And some people and industries and groups and whatnot are adapting this much more quickly than others. I know for myself, a year ago, you wouldn't have seen me on these webinars. I'd rather meet you in person. We are all adapting to it in different ways. But the importance of is the companies that are, because it will give them the opportunity to continue to move forward into the future as other companies struggle to catch up. And it will change the way that we do things, even beyond this era. Touching upon just very briefly on the COVID, because a question here about the vaccines, who's going to be the winner? I think this means who should I invest in? It wasn't really specific. There are at least 5 and maybe more large companies that are in stage 3 FDA trials for the vaccine. Stage 3 trials are essentially just the scalability and really just testing on a wider population. And I'm sure there's a lot more that the healthcare experts can add to that. They're so confident that they have a good vaccine that they're already producing millions and millions of doses as we speak to get them out to the population very, very quickly. You wouldn't do that if you weren't sure. We had a conference call with the heads of these companies. It was actually really good as economists. And we're able to ask questions. And one thing that caught my attention most of all is they said, it's really not a complicated virus, which is kind of interesting because you wouldn't really think you'd hear that around COVID. But I guess structurally, once you figure it out, it's not too complicated. The only thing now is we have a very rigorous testing process to be really sure that it's safe to administer. And that's what's taking a little bit more time. Bring this up because it's going to really touch on the economic things coming up, especially in 2021. There are at least 3, and there might be up to 5, I'm not 100% sure here, countries that are already vaccinating parts of their populations. They're already ahead with their vaccine. Will it work? Will it not work? We won't know, only time will tell. But this is already in process and there will be a solution. We just don't know how effective, of course, it will be. And the other big question is how many people will get vaccinated? How many people do it? Will we get to that whatever magic herd immunity number or not? That only time will tell. But the technology's there, the capacity's there. We're in the last stages. The ideas at this point are November, December. Some people even say October. That might be a bit optimistic when they'll start doing the vaccines. That will, again, have a really big impact on people's comfort level as that unrolls. So I'm going to put these on for a moment to make sure because I'm going to jump back and forth between the 2 of them. So the 2 things that concern investors the most right now is really around the election and COVID. And both of these things are really, really close to being resolved, most likely. No promises here, obviously. Most likely. So the idea of many investors is, let's wait until these are resolved. Let's wait till after the election. Let's wait until we have the vaccine and we're administering it. The only downside to that is a lot of opportunity will be lost by then. So I'm of the mindset for suitable investors who have the right time horizon, and again, suitable I mean by risk tolerance, and should you invest or not, is don't wait for the things to go away. Don't wait for the moment when everything is peachy, because the opportunity then is lost. The old saying, fortune favors the brave, definitely applies here. Again, I'm not saying go out and invest because it's very individual and there's a lot of other factors to consider. But there's a lot of companies out there that have not yet run up, that have a lot of capacity to do so as these two things unwind. And unless you believe that we will collapse as a nation because we don't have a president, or that we will never resolve anything and we'll be locked down forever, it would be a wise time to start to consider where you want to be positioned, again, for suitable investors. So you think of it like a marathon. I'm a distance runner, for those of you who don't know me. The hardest part about running long distance, it's really that last mile or so. It's that last mile or so, because you're so exhausted and you've been running so far, and you're so many miles, and the finish line just seems like a million miles away, but it's only really a mile away. And you can't even imagine that moment when you can be done. It's just almost there. And that's very much this. We're very close to the finish line. And I'm not saying this in a promissory way. I don't know any more than anyone else listening to this how COVID will resolve itself. But we have enough on our side, enough in our favor at this point, by enough sources to say that the results of the election will be unrocky and probably very unpleasant. And the rollout of the vaccine, which will have a lot of uncertainty around it, we're still further along now than we were in the past. And we will recover. The recovery when you have this shock of recession, when you have a recession that you can't see coming by data, there's the three things that cause a recession, only one you can't see coming. The one you can't see coming is a 9/11 or COVID situation. When you have these shocks, there's usually a hard drop and then a pretty quick recovery. 50% of the recovery happens almost right away. The other 50% takes time. It looks now as if with COVID, we actually went down 3/4 recovery, but I want to stress that last quarter is going to be slow. Corporate earnings will be first. The GDP numbers will be second. Unemployment is going to lag the longest. Unemployment is going to take the longest. There's a lot of things that still haven't popped up within the economy, and there's a lot of risks out there. There's a lot of sectors, I'm not saying sectors, specific sectors and areas that are still very dangerous. And I use the example of the fires. So fires, I've said this before, but I'll say it again. The firefighters will say one dangerous thing about fighting fires is what's burning below the duff. All that stuff on the forest floor, burning below and then flares up somewhere, maybe behind their lines or where they don't expect it. And we will have these flare-ups. We will have these pops and things that will show up, especially the longer the duration of the shelter in place goes on. And I'm saying I should say shelter in place, the shutdown of various industries and businesses, the limitations in what we do, in addition to the lack of stimulus or less stimulus. The next president, once all that gets resolved, almost certainly is going to do some form of stimulus. So it's not going away, it's just delayed at this point. How that shakes, and it will happen because both sides want to do it, they just don't want the other side to win if they do it. So that will happen. Unfortunately, not everyone's going to be able to hang on through this period of time. So that there's these flare-ups, there's a lot of issues here. So that's one thing I really want to touch upon. So the uncertainty is more temporary than permanent. However, there's always uncertainty. Another challenge on the economy right now is very interesting fact is during the financial crisis, there were $4 trillion in cash on hand in individual and corporate savings accounts. Okay, we now are over $8 trillion in cash on hand in individual and business accounts. In other words, saved in cash. That's a very good thing. Using a fire analogy again, there's kindling. There's kindling for the recovery. The cash will be put to work when people feel comfortable and confident enough doing it. It may be a very quick thing. Again, if we have a vaccine, the election's over, that cash is going to move quickly. Why will it move quickly? There's no return on cash. If any of you have looked at the interest rates on your bank accounts, CDs and the like, there's no return on cash. As inflation picks up, and it will within the next couple of years, depending on how quickly the economy recovers, when it picks up, it's going to become even more painful because one of the most insidious forms of loss is a loss of the purchasing power on your money. You have $10 in the bank now, it can buy you a burrito. Well, maybe if you're lucky. I think burritos are more expensive than $10. And inflation hits, now it's a $15 burrito. It's a $20 burrito. Now you can buy half a burrito. This really, really, really matters. And so when there's a pressure, which is, there's no other alternative than investing, because you need to do something with this money because you're losing your purchasing power, in addition to the fact that people want to feel as if they're doing something. So the money will be deployed, and that's why the recovery is going to be fairly quick when it happens and fairly widespread. This is not only on a business level, this is on an individual level as well. A thing I hear pretty much across the board from my clients is they cannot wait until they can travel again. I mean, they have a list of the places they're going to go when they either can, things aren't shut down, or they feel safe doing so. So that will burst forth because the money is there, the kindling is there to start the fire when it happens. This is not leveraged money. This is not money that can go away. This is not risk money. This is money and available on cash. Again, how it's deployed. I want to mention the $8 trillion I talked about is in checking and savings on corporate levels. This does not incur, it's not about any debt or any borrowing or anything like that. I want to make sure that was clear on that. The other component to it is for investors is people wanting to invest. The question often is, where should I invest? What should I invest in? Now, this is a very personal, very individual answer that depends on the person. It's never as simple as, are you aggressive? Are you conservative? That's too simplistic. There's a lot of other factors of whatever's going on in your life to know what to do. But there's also a lot of gradations of that. You can put a toe in the water, or you can jump off the cliff. So there's a lot of ways and different ways that people can approach this that's aligned with their risk, but is also, suitable for what's going on. Let's see what else I have here. Okay, I want to talk a little bit about some of the sectors, because that was a question that came up as well. So saying, sectors is basically areas like consumer spending, energy, financials, and things like that. And that's not so much about investing areas, but kind of the effects of all of everything and how it's happening. And it's not as easy as the sectors. It has a lot to do with the companies within. So I have a portfolio now. It's got 50 or so stocks in it that are picked out from different sectors. They're the ones that are adapting to technology the quickest. The ones that are, you can just see they're coming up faster than everybody else. And sometimes when I put them in the client's portfolios, they go, "Oh, why'd you buy that boring old thing?" Because it's exciting to buy the climbing up the techs, the ones that are doing well. And I said, because the technology is being deployed by this company. It's wave 2. Wave 1, the companies less affected, the ones that are growing in this environment. Wave 2, the companies that are using technology to adapt to the fact that they need to work in a different environment right now, but also that we just got pulled 6 years into the future. Okay, jump up and adapt. Okay, so that wave 2 is these companies that you would think of, and I'm not giving any names here because I don't like the regulatory gods to say I'm giving advice and tips on this, but you can always talk to me privately. But there are companies that you wouldn't think much of, but they are rapidly capturing market share. And again, kind of below the surface because so much focus on the technology. And you can see when the markets correct, they don't correct as much as their peers. So I'm not the only one seeing this. They're actually able to hold up pretty well. But that comes into the kind of sectors. There's no sector out there that doesn't have opportunity in it right now. During March, dividends were cut. A lot of companies cut back their dividends because of the uncertainty, and they didn't want to take risk by paying out cash to investors. It was temporary. About 40% of those companies have already reinstated their dividends. Actually, what am I talking about? I misspoke. 80% of those companies have reinstated their dividends back a couple of months ago, and no one has cut dividends since June or July. No one has cut them since then. So now there's a lot of opportunity for companies that can come up and running, but also pay you a better dividend or yield than your cash. So you can be patiently wait for these companies to recover. I bring up these ideas. I didn't want to get too much into the weeds and the technicalities because that's better done on an individual level. But I wanted to show beyond the news is that the opportunities are presenting themselves. The breadth of the opportunities is actually more stable than the initial run-up of essentially one sector. And it shows that we have a sustained recovery ahead. At this point, 2021 is still looking at to be a pretty good year, regardless of who's in office. Okay, don't throw any tomatoes at me, regardless of who's in office, the economy will likely do. And that is because whoever's elected, and the makeup of the Congress and the Senate, the only thing that could affect this, and again, no tomatoes, please, if we have the blue wave, if we have Democrat across the board, then you might see a major policy shift, a lot of new taxes, a lot of new laws, a lot of new regulations that could slow but not stop the recovery. And I'm not picking on the Democrats. Please don't take it that way. It would be the exact same thing as if we had a red wave. Because again, it's the sudden shock and shift from one way of doing things to another that creates uncertainty around the markets. And we can see this historically. When there's been a sweep of either party, things get a little rocky for a while because they push through as much policy as they can because that window is only 2 years. They know it because there's usually a shift after that, and they try to get as many things done as possible. So please, not picking on any parties here. It's just the nature of when you suddenly shift from one direction to the other. You can see that. So regardless of who's elected, there could be some differences, again, depending on the makeup of the Congress and Senate. The economy should do pretty well next year. We will have challenges. We will have shocks. We will have surprises. But overall, there's enough in place right now for it to continue to do well. The Federal Reserve has made it very clear, even under intense congressional scrutiny this week, that we will do whatever's necessary to support the economy. And one of their biggest frustrations is the Fed can do a lot of amazing things and a lot of phenomenal magic. We would be in a very different place as a nation right now had they not done what they did back in March. However, they can't actually get the money out into the economy. That is up to Congress and the president. That's it. That's the stopgap right now. They can do anything, but they can't get it directly in any meaningful way out. But they will stand by. They will do what's necessary to protect and support the system as we're going through this time. Just like everybody else, I have no idea how long that we will have any level of shutdown, shelter in place, or the virus will be a concern. Because there are two levels to that. One is people's ability to do things. Things are closed, you can't do it. As many of you know, I go to Peru twice a year. Peru's borders are closed. I can't go there, even if I want to. The second level is you can, but do you feel safe doing so? You and your family feel safe doing so. So this may take time. Even if we open up and even if we have a vaccine, how many people feel comfortable and confident? And that's unknown at this point. But that's something to watch. But even regardless, all of the modeling we've done is that there's a continuation of the shelter in place that we have now. And that's going to continue on into next year. If that changes, of course, it only would be more to the upside. Unless the concern people have, we have another wave, unlike the economic wave I was talking about, another wave of COVID, resurgence in the winter as people are indoors and the cold and flu season and whatnot. I'm not a healthcare expert. I can't speak to that. And nobody knows at this point if that will be the case. Best we can do is look what's happening in the southern hemisphere countries and see if there's variations there. I'm sure they're modeled that out. I don't know the answer. Only thing I can think is if we're still socially distancing and wearing masks when we're indoors in groups of people, we're probably less likely to get the cold and the flu too. Or by the way, washing our hands. So maybe it's not going to be as difficult as some fear. However, we're unlikely to shut down in the way that we did back in March and April. Again, we've learned a lot, and it's unlikely. There could be restrictions, there could be pullbacks on what's open, but it's unlikely to be shut down. And if we do shut down a bit more, we're better prepared because we've been there before. Okay, I'm going to jump into some questions here, and then just to see if there's anything else. Keep them coming on the Q&A window so I can get to those too. Okay, some of these I haven't seen yet. There's only the ones at the bottom I've read. What if Trump doesn't step down? Social unrest, ? I don't know. There's a system in place for that is all I know. It's been talked about at length, I'm sure. I don't really, from an economic standpoint, I don't think that it's something to really be concerned about. It'll be certainly something that they'll be talking about in the news and pundits back and forth. What if this happens? What if this happens? But there truly is, and you can look it up. There is a process if that was to happen, and it would be temporary on the economic front. It would certainly be a temporary situation, nothing more than that. And I'm going to add that with the social unrest aspect. It's going to depend largely how the results of the election are handled on a lot of levels, to what type of unrest there may be. I don't buy into the more extreme fears that surround that. But it could be a bumpy ride, and outside of my expertise beyond that. A strategy around the IRA, 100K IRA distributions. Okay, for those of you who don't know, I've talked about it in one of my earlier webinars. Under the CARES Act, if you or a family member have been affected by COVID, and you want to go to the IRS website for this because I'm just going to touch upon it. There's more detail. Essentially, if you've taken an economic hit or impact due to COVID, you or a family member becomes ill from COVID, there's quite a broad range of qualifying events, which would allow you to pull up to $100,000 out of your IRA, and you have 3 years to pay the taxes. So let's say you pulled money out of the IRA, you had a $9,000 tax bill, you would pay $3,000 this year and $3,000 the next 2 years. And the design of that was just to give people access to money if they were financially impacted without hitting, and the penalties also waived. So without getting penalized or heavily taxed because we're in extraordinary times. There are a lot of strategies around that, potentially for some people. Again, please don't do this at home without talking to a professional because there's a lot of considerations. It's not a one-step decision where people can use that money to convert it into a Roth or other strategy. So that goes away at the end of this year unless they extend it. It was part of the CARES Act. And then, again, the round 2 of stimulus is, or maybe it's round 4, is still stuck. So I don't see anything changing with that this year, and we'll see if it goes next year. But do talk to your financial professional if something like that may make sense for you. But please don't go off and automatically do it because you really want to see it in collaboration with the rest of your life and the rest of your financial plan. There are other things that have come out of the CARES Act that are great planning strategies. There's a number of things that came out of the Secure Act, which passed in January, that are also great planning strategies. There's some of the things in the Secure Act will go away. The Secure Act is the official name of, other people call it the Trump tax cuts. Some of these things sunset in 2023. So, and also could be changed, especially with a change in administration. So do talk to myself. Certainly you can talk to me, or if you have another financial professional, talk to them if it's suitable for you. But take advantage of a lot of these things that have come about with COVID and sort of make lemonade out of lemons if it makes sense in your financial plan. Vaccine, who will be the first to invest? Oh, who's going to be the first? It's again, investment question. No idea. And that's sort of a guess, sort of a gamble. Even if one company, because there's so many that are right there, if one company gets it, it's not certain what the profit margins will be. As the president has made it quite clear that the intention, and I'm not saying this is his idea or it came from somewhere else, but the intention is that the vaccines will be free. So I'm not sure how that's actually getting paid for. I don't know if the company will be paid for their R&D and distribution, so they break even. But it's not certain to be a huge profitable event. So yes, the stocks will certainly go up, but I'm not sure on the investment side if that will make sense until we actually know the specifics of it. And again, there's more than one company. So there could be multiple. It'd be very hard for one company to produce and vaccinate 340 million people. And that's just this country, not counting any other countries that we help out. So better off to invest in a diversified way if you want to be in this space, because you can capture it. If it manifests, you can capture it multiple ways. What about taxes, capital gains, income taxes, and whatnot? You talked about Biden's tax plan, and then question marks. Okay, so I'll kind of save that more for the political one. But if you want to look sooner, you can go to Joe Biden's website, and he kind of lays out, his tax strategy. It may or may not happen. That's been a concern with a lot of people. People put a lot of things on an election website, and it doesn't mean they actually do them when they get elected. But it is something to be mindful of, because if he's elected, and if he does it, and if it passes Congress and Senate, there's a lot of ands I'm saying here. It may affect people's financial planning, especially the loss of step up in basis on assets and whatnot. So you may want to consider as part of your planning that if there's, you may want to do things maybe this year, just in case, as long as, again, never look at things just with taxes, and certainly never look at things around politics. Look at it, does this make sense anyway in your plan, and you just rather do it this year when there's more certainty than next year. Every single president comes up with their own tax ideas, and Congress and the Senate come up with their ideas, the states come up with their ideas. It's a constantly moving world. So don't fear what hasn't happened, more focus on what you can do now with what you have, because you can kind of net a lot of that out, because who knows what will be the case after this election, the next election. Again, the states can pop up with things, which is a good thing to touch upon with this part of it, which I mentioned before about some assembly bills that were going in California, specifically some pretty onerous ones. I won't get into the details because there'll be very good news about it. Some of them that were actually pretty onerous and pretty significant around wealth taxes and the like. And just to describe a wealth tax, it basically, instead of being taxed on the gains, when you sell something and there's a gain, your house, your stocks, etc., your business, you would just be taxed every year on the value of all the stuff you own, which can be really, really difficult for someone who owns a lot of land, owns a building or business, or any other illiquid assets, because you would have to come up with the money, say, to pay taxes on the value of your home, not on, the cash you have on hand or on the profit from the sale of that. So there were some pretty onerous stuff that was being bandied about and going through the assembly. The good news is Governor Newsom came out, and I'm sort of going to paraphrase this, can't remember his exact words, but he said something to the like of, in a time in which Californians have discovered exactly how mobile they are, the last thing we want to do is drive more people out of our state. I will not sign these bills. So that's a collective sigh of relief for a lot of people. Again, that can impact anyone who probably owns a house at this point pretty significantly. It's not going anywhere, at least for the foreseeable future. But that comes back to what I said before, the importance of planning, because this is a constantly changing thing. You can have all your focus on what a presidential candidate's going to do, and then miss something happen in your own state that's a lot more, has a much greater effect potentially. Okay, I think I covered the questions here, and I'll jump over to questions here. Here's an example. Can you give us an example, generally speaking, company adapting to use technology that is doing better? I can give you a couple of them actually. One is more in the environmental space, and another one is in the logistics space. So I'll start with the logistics. We discovered, and I've spoken about this before, but we've discovered that our supply chain does not adapt really well to rapid change. So the toilet paper story. We use toilet paper very consistently. How we use it in our homes and how we use it in our workplaces is very consistent. So consistent that the factories produce as much toilet paper as they know that we're going to need. The giant rolls for the hotels, for the sports stadiums, for your workplace, office space and whatnot, and the rolls that we use at home. We do not import toilet paper, very rarely. It's too darn expensive to ship it or to fly it. We make it here. But all of a sudden, when our toilet paper needs suddenly shifted, to some degree, people stocking up, the hoarding mentality. The other degree is, instead of working and using the giant rolls and going out and eat and all those things, all of a sudden we didn't need the giant rolls anymore, we just needed the little home rolls. But to get that logistically in place took months and months went by before you started to see toilet paper commonly available again. And that showed a huge weakness in our supply chains across the board. And the supply chains have lots of little links in them, lots of little links. So you think how data is sent around the world. It's efficiently and effectively done for the most part, but the supply chain, not so much. And when a sudden disruption happens, not prepared, it takes a while, domestically even, I'm not talking about imports, to get it back in place. We also saw some scarcities around when China shut down before the US around COVID. All of a sudden it was harder to get things in factories who were still open and still producing because we were still open, couldn't get the materials they needed from overseas because China and was shut down. So there was a lot of impacts from that. So a lot was learned about how do we make the supply chains better. And so companies that are using, I call it blockchain-like technology, and the techies will probably hate me for using those terms because they may not be accurate, but technology where there's a shared ledger and information, because the supply chain thing is a lot about trust. We need your money, we need to see, all the documents signed, we need to know, there's a lot of chunkiness in it. So there's a lot of technology out there that can make this more efficient with the shared ledger type of technology, in addition to how you manage and control your inventory and all of your suppliers below you from the raw materials on, and all the people you're distributing to on the top end. And this would take a whole hour to explain some of the technologies happening, but I invest in companies where I see that because that's not going away. If you have a more efficient supply chain, you've reduced your costs, you've increased your efficiencies, that will put you ahead of your competition. So that's one. On the environmental side of it, is companies are looking for ways to, especially companies that have a mindset about this, to do good for the environment, right? To reduce their use of fossil fuels, to do, all along the board. So now we've added the health and safety of a workforce in there. Okay? Now we've added companies saying, even beyond COVID, do we have our team travel less and Zoom more? Do we do small regional meetings where people get together again, when safe to do so, instead of these large big conferences? Do we do things differently, not because of COVID, but also to reduce our carbon footprint, right? So there's a lot of thought process to that, a lot of thought process to cleanliness within the office space, putting in HEPA level filters that filter out molds and toxins and viruses and the like in the system to have their workforce feel safe coming back to work. Not because it's mandated by the government, but because if you want to keep good employees happy, you want them to feel safe and secure. So there's a lot of work towards that in the environmental space. Reducing carbon footprint, because we just proved we could work a lot differently, because again, we're pulled 6 years into the future, but there's a lot of things in that space as well. So companies get the benefit of saying, we're flying this much less people around the country, we just reduced our carbon footprint by this much. Great media exposure to do the right thing, and great towards global warming, right? If companies implement this as part of their culture, we're going to reduce significantly the impact in areas like that. In addition to that, states are taking it upon themselves to implement things even if the federal government's not doing it. So we're not as locked into one way of doing things. Companies have become a lot more open to doing things that they wouldn't have done before because it cost too much and it wasn't certain it was going to work, and their competitors weren't doing it anyway. And now they've learned that we can do a lot more than we thought we could do. All we have to do is find the technology or the systems or process to do it. And this is even happening in sectors you wouldn't even imagine, like the energy sector. It's pretty amazing to see how things are changing in there. And that's a slow sector to change usually, but the way that things are changing in there. In commodities and raw materials, how things are changing. It's so broad and so many things are happening. I could tell so many stories, but again, you guys will get tired of hearing from me at that point. Okay, so let me get to the next question. What about the hospitality industry? Sorry about that. Or fast in the next 2 years. Hospitality industry is probably going to fracture, and different parts will recover differently. Two pieces to the puzzle. Number one, again, how safe people feel, okay, to travel and to do things. Number two, do people do things the way they did before? I use the conferences as an example. So I go to a number of conferences throughout the year on various economic topics or planning related topics. And it's, a lot of people traveling, and there's a lot of money involved in that. Not only the conference centers and what the cost is, to have one, but also all of the hotels and the restaurants and the bars and the workforce that's all involved. There's quite a lot of economic activity around conferences, and they happen all over the country every single day. And every topic you can imagine. For any of you that have been to downtown San Jose during the furry convention, you will see there's any topic you can imagine has a conference. But there's a lot of economic activity beyond the conference. Do we do them again? Do we do them differently? We really don't know yet. Most people want to be around people, and I think a lot of things are going to come back a lot faster than people think, just maybe in a different ways. Sporting events, concerts, clubs and things like that will probably come back more quickly. And again, taking COVID out of it, from the standpoint of, again, people want to be out, they want to be doing things, they just they want to feel safe doing so. So there's going to be different recoveries at different stages. The ones that will recover the most quickly, upon the announcement of a vaccine, even though people won't necessarily realize it will take a while to vaccinate people, you're going to already see that movement happen. People are going to say, okay, there's a vaccine, it's available, it might take a while, but I'm going to book that trip to Europe next year. That's one. The second one, that is, because this time went on, do they hire people back in the same way, or are things done in a different way? So do they need as many workers and whatnot? So that's another aspect. But the idea of people traveling, leisure, the thing I hear from clients, one of the most often things I hear on the personal life, I can't wait to be able to travel again. The desire is there. It just has to be safe to do it. And companies going forward, whether with hotels, conferences and whatnot, will have an eye towards making people feel safe there. Making people feel that it's clean, to have sanitary in place and whatnot, because that will bring the confidence forward. Some of you have heard this story, but I will say it. I think one area that's going to come back and do very well in the not too distant future is going to be the cruise ships. And yes, I know, the floating petri dish in the sea. But if you think of it this way, they now have testing that you can do instantaneously for COVID that they have. It's available. Imagine if you could test everybody before they got on the boat. The boat's been fully sanitized, HEPA virus filtration level system on the boat. People are tested, the crew and all the passengers are tested before getting on the boat. And that is the safest place you can be floating around in the ocean. No port stops, nothing like that. But a lot of people, especially the most vulnerable population, they don't want to just sit at home for the rest of their lives. They want to get out and do things. And I can see that as being a very safe place if properly managed. Right now, they're not allowed to float. They're not allowed to go out. But when they are, if they can put these things in place, we'll probably see the ridership, or whatever you call it, floatership, rising rapidly if people feel safe to do so. So if you just put it back, oh, we're just going to cruise like normal, people are going to be pretty nervous because there was some pretty bad outbreaks there. But if they can show and demonstrate all of the things in place, people will come back. I was in Nevada over the weekend. Some things I had to get done there. And I stopped in a casino the first night I got there to spend the night to sleep because it was a long drive and I just needed a place to sleep in downtown Reno. I was surprised at how full the casino was full of people. Masked, social distance, they have protocols, more than I've seen anywhere. Temperature check every time you went into the building. Very, very careful. But a lot of people together. It was the first time I'd actually seen people like that in the together space. So there are people coming out and there are people doing things, even in this environment. But it was nothing like what it had been in the past. So again, those are the people that say, I feel safe. Some people feel safe because they don't fear the virus. Other people, they just doesn't bother them. Others feel safe because they see the protocols that they put in place to make them feel comfortable. Airplanes, the same thing, filtration systems and the like. So that was somewhat of a longer answer to that, but I did want to kind of touch upon all these different areas and all the different ways that you can see the recoveries. Airline and companies installing better air, that's what I just talked about, better air filtration systems and the other environmental factors in that field. I know for a fact they're working on it very diligently. I'm sure it's a cost to benefit thing. Right now, airline travel is just under half of what it was pre-COVID. So there's actually quite a lot of people flying. I'm thinking for a moment, make sure I get my numbers right. There's a lot of people flying, and remember, international travel is largely shut down. So this is domestic flying about. I believe you have to wear, I haven't been on a plane, so I believe you have to wear a mask. But there's no social distancing on planes. So these are people that are close to one another. And that is an environment where you can't socially distance, not in a way that's economically viable to the airlines. So that being said, that's a pace I think could take people a little more time that are cautious, just because, again, you can't take that one extra step of the social distancing, even with all the sanitation and whatnot. But I'm certain they're working on it because, remember, even beyond COVID, we're going to have more things that will pop up. And it's, not saying it'll be a virus like this, but people are that idea of feeling safe is going to be with us for some time. Safety is going to be something that companies are really going to be promoting to be successful in this next round. I wanted to make sure if there's more questions, I'll watch for it, but I want to make sure to touch briefly upon this question that people have asked, and I'm going to touch upon the last question here, and then I'll jump into it because it kind of fits with it. So the idea that I've gotten a lot around, the questions I get a lot around financial consciousness, because people have heard me use that word, they've seen it on our website, they've seen it in presentations I've done, and the question I usually get is, what is that? What is financial consciousness? So I want to take a moment or two to talk about this in a small level and then a broad level, because it means a lot of different things to different people. In its simplest definition, consciousness means awareness and understanding. Awareness and understanding about how your financial decisions and your financial life integrate and fit within the rest of your life, the things that are really, really important to you. And the reason to define it this way is so often people compartmentalize the financial from the rest of their life. Like, that's the financial stuff, okay? Not usually fun. This is the rest of my life, hopefully fun, or at least getting in that direction. And there's a separation, and it causes oftentimes neglect of decision making because it's not fun, don't know what to do, there's a lot of stress around it, whatnot, and then that it gets somewhat neglected because it doesn't feel like that's really what's important to me. So financial consciousness is pulling that together and seeing how all the decisions that you make can do everything possible to bring you to your highest purpose, to bring you to what it is that's important to you in your life. Not just yourself personally, but for the causes that you care about, for the things that you care about, even beyond yourself. And some people do it through the portfolio. Any client that has an objective or something that's very valuable and important to them, I want to see that represented in the portfolio. Provided it makes financial sense, do your investments align with your values? And I do say financial sense because there's different levels of risk even in that type of investing. You can buy stock in a startup algae company that might redefine how we get energy, and it may or may not be successful, pretty high risk, because you care about the environment and you want to replace fossil fuels. Or you could look for other ways to do that, right, within the portfolio if you don't want to take that same risk. But have what you own in your portfolio match your values, brings you connectivity to your money, and your money is what's putting the foundation, the tools in place to do the things that you want to do for yourself, the people you love, and the causes that you believe in. So the portfolio, that's a place, again, great passion of mine. Beyond that is how your decision making, your values line up with the decisions around money. And an example of this one would be if it's very, very important for you to live in the forest because you love living in the forest and that is a very happy place for you, you have to take into account that your insurance could be higher. You have to take into account the risk of fire and what it takes to maintain your property. There are costs to that. Are these costs important? Are these costs lined up with the value? Because oftentimes there's not really a right or wrong thing to do with money for the most part. It's what's right or wrong for you. So aligning it like a pyramid. Here's what's most important for me and for those I love and the things I care about. And how do I make that happen with my decision making? So if you have concerns about things happening in society, how can you do that with your money? At the same time, you're meeting your goals and expectations and needs of yourself and your family. But align that, because the more aligned you are, the stronger your intention is, and the stronger your intention is, the more likely you are to be successful. It does not mean that you have to think about your money every day. It does not mean that you need to think about finances every day. It makes that connection to your money. Beyond that is planning on what it is that you want to do and how to get there, each little step to get there. The thing that has most people not want to do financial planning is 3. Number 1, don't know someone that they trust. Can't find someone they like and trust because there's a lot of really bad people in this industry, in my industry for sure. And maybe some bad experiences or bad stories. That takes some time and effort. It's almost like dating. To find that right person that you know has your best interests and you feel confident in, because you're trusting that person to do something that neither one of you can guarantee the outcome, especially in the investing realm, right? You have confidence in that. So that's one, is finding that person. Another one is it's boring, it's unpleasant, or a bad connection or relationship with money. Planning helps take away that. It helps take away that because then the money has a purpose and it's not attached to that energy or that thought process of something unpleasant that happened to you in your past around money. You kind of redefining the energy and the belief and the use of money. So for example, if you were raised in a household where money was a tool used to control, you may have just a aversion towards, money, it's bad, it's dirty, and all these negative things happen. But then when you can change that to say, here's how you're going to accomplish things that are of great value to you for society, for the country, for your family, for whomever, it changes that relationship. And then there's that connection, and then powerful things happen. You never want to constrict a tube of abundance by neglecting your money. And that's exactly what happens when you either neglect it or force it away or push it away because it's bad. The final one is, the big one is, how can you plan for a future which is so uncertain? And everyone has a story of that person that planned for retirement. I've had clients in this, but planned for retirement and then had a heart attack or this or that happened. All these events happen. And how can you plan for that? Well, a good planner will take these things into account. You don't plan only for the future. It's too limited. You're living life now. This is present, and the present moment is the only moment we truly have. How do you enjoy now and also prepare for and enjoy the future? And that's where planning comes in. And good planning allows you to navigate those changes. When something happens, you can navigate it with good planning. That's very important. It's not a static thing. You're not trying to predict what's going to happen when you're 60, 70, 80, what's going to happen to your children. You don't know. You're planning where you are now, and you change it as things change. But redefining that relationship with money is a really important tool in your toolbox, but it's not the be-all and end-all. And whatever you do, don't listen to those advertisements that say, do you have your retirement number? There is no such thing on a broad level. Everybody's number is different, and it depends on what they need to live the life that brings them the greatest satisfaction and purpose. Everyone's different. Some people's number is going to be higher than other people's number. There's no right number. But there's trade-offs. There's trade-offs in what you want to do. What would you sacrifice now to do something in the future? What would you want to do now and willing to maybe do something different in the future? Very personal. This is financial consciousness. This is that awareness and that connection with all of these aspects. In a time of such great uncertainty, in a time that it seems every time you turn on the news, it's bad. It's always bad. It's never positive. Not enough fuzzy puppy dogs and cute kittens or anything like that. It's negative. In the time of the uncertainty, especially that we've experienced in 2020, that is the time when you think of how can I plan for the future in a different way. And this is the optimism and the positivity that you can connect your money with your life and with your mission and your vision of what you want to accomplish. One of funny story I heard, and as we approach the end of 2020, it's going to probably become even more so, which was, I'm going to stay up until midnight on January 31st. Not because I want to ring in the new year, but that I want to make sure the old year leaves. Now, that is true. 2020 has been quite the challenge. However, we have all learned a great deal from it. In some cases, we've learned that we can actually sometimes teach our children, and they can be at home. We've learned that we can work differently. We've learned that we can live life differently. We've all adapted to this at times in different ways. But it's a great reminder of the power of planning. In my entire career, I have never had the number of clients that I do now that are rethinking where they live. It's significant. It's a tremendous number of people are rethinking where they live, whether they're buying another home, whether they're moving out of the area. It's that rethinking of life, and all of this involves planning. So for those of you that work with me, this is the process. If there's more I can do, please let me know, because I so much love connecting your story and what I know about you to the portfolio work that I do is I'm reevaluating them each month. And please share it with me. For those of you who are not, feel free to reach out to me if you would like to. You don't have to hire me, but at least I can kind of start you off on the vision of doing that. With this, I think I've covered the questions, and we're getting close to the end of our time today. I wanted to just briefly touch upon some upcoming webinars because they're kind of really fun. And that is the next one on October 7th. We're going to have some special guests, so you won't have to spend an hour looking at Kristina's face. This one is going to be on health and wellness, and this is going to be with Dr. Bill Lloyd. You will get the invitation soon. You can look him up if you'd like. He's a really good doctor. He speaks nationally, not to be confused with Dr. Phil. This is Dr. Bill. He's very engaging. He's very knowledgeable, so get your questions ready. He's going to talk about ways to keep yourself healthy and well, and he's going to talk about a lot of really common things around healthcare. He will also answer questions, so the Q&A is important. If you have questions, I recommend strongly sending them in advance. I will not connect your name with the question in any way. And the reason being is I want to be sure that they get answered if we get a lot of questions that day. So that's October 7th. This one will be later in the day. If you want to be live, it's going to be at 4 o'clock because we have to be, again, national speaker on Dr. Bill's schedule. October 15th, we'll have a cooking class. We are going to cook paella together. This is going to be with Deborah Costella of Cosmic Muffin, and she is going to teach us how to cook. For those of you who register, cook paella, which I've actually never done. And she's going to send, for those of you who register, she will send us the ingredients list in advance and the tools you want to have on hand in your kitchen. So we get to do this in our respective kitchens. For some lucky registrants, we are going to be sending you a gift box of some of the dry ingredients, the non-perishable component. So register soon so your name will be drawn out of the hat to get some of the goodies in advance and not have to go buy all those odd things in the store that you don't have on hand. Finally, October 22nd will be update on the economy and the election. Okay, 2.0, final run. I'm going to talk about any of the measures on the initiatives, probably not using the right words, that you vote on. Anything that has an economic component, I'll kind of get into those in a little bit more detail. So it'll be somewhat California specific. Sorry about those of you out of state. But I'll talk about the national. It'll be a brief one. Each one of these, I'm going to do a talk on the economy. I'll give a brief update. It'll be much briefer than this one. So anything meaningful or significant happening in the economy, I will address. before our special guest comes in and talks to us about all the other things important in our life, which is good food and good health. But you don't have to wait for these webinars. You can always reach out to me if you have questions about anything that's going on. I will make the time to answer them for you. So I thank you again very much for coming to this webinar. I really greatly enjoy doing them. I miss everyone in person so much. Some of you are coming back into the office, and you are welcome to come in. We are seeing clients in person. For those of you who are not ready for that yet, I love talking to you by Zoom, by phone, again in person, however you'd like. And I'm looking forward to the day when we are seeing more of one another. In the meantime, like I said, please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I am in service, and I'm grateful for your support and trust. Thank you. Bye for now.